Hi, my name is Tara Moore, and thank you for coming to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation's second of the Marine Fisheries webinar series. And this one will be on shrimp trawling. It's a really timely topic, and we're happy that you're able to be here. I will turn it over to Dr. Lewis Daniel, who will be starting us off and presenting our presenters today. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Welcome. I guess you can hear me, Tara? Everything's good? Okay, great. This thing's been temperamental today. Again, I'm Lewis Daniel. I'm the marine scientist for the Wildlife Federation. Joining me today is Blakely Hilbrand from the Southern Environmental Law Center. She was very instrumental in our development of our shrimp trawl petition. And it's really good to see Blakely, and I appreciate her joining us today. And also with us will be Fred Harris, former director of the Wildlife Commission and a very well-known, well-respected fisheries scientist along the East Coast and probably the country and maybe the world, with us on these issues since I began. And like Southern Flounder, this is an issue that is consistent with our Sound Solutions program that is directed by our board of directors. So with that quick introduction, I'm going to try and hope that I can get to the PowerPoint presentation about shrimp trawl bycatch today. So this is just to give you some visuals. This is what I would say looks like the traditional shrimp trawl fleet. Looks like they're heading back in from a day offshore or a day in the sounds shrimping. And more typical, this is what we see today more frequently, is the larger trawlers. Gives you sort of a visual of a catch, with the gentleman sorting the shrimp from the other non-shrimp catches. You can see a group of fish in the background there behind near the scupper that'll probably be pushed through at some point, and the rest of the bycatch will be returned to the water at some period of time. So this has really been recognized, bycatch in the shrimp trawl fishery has been recognized as a pretty significant issue for years. Back in the 70s and 80s, we recognized it. When we started working on turtle excluder devices in the late 80s, we really started to notice the significant amount of fish bycatch in shrimp trawling. And many states at that time began or had already prohibited shrimp trawling in their estuary environments. The states of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida have all prohibited shrimp trawling in their nursery grounds, their estuarine areas, for at least the past 30 years, and many since even before that. I believe Georgia made this decision and did this in the 50s. The issue was talked about a lot. North Carolina was one of the first states to actually try to implement bycatch reduction devices. It was sort of seat of the pants. We didn't really know what we were doing at the time. But we did require the devices, but they weren't tested and they weren't shown to have any real effectiveness. The ASMFC, when they developed the weakfish fishery management plan in 1994, recognized in the stock assessment that shrimp trawl bycatch was a mortality on juvenile weakfish. But the use, having no real good observer data and not being able to quantify the exact amounts, it was very difficult to use those estimates in any kind of stock assessment. But the assessment did indicate that a 52% reduction in weakfish mortality from shrimp trawls was necessary in order to rebuild that fishery. And so as a result, Amendment 3 required bycatch reduction devices in shrimp trawls to reduce weakfish bycatch by 50%. So as we began to implement that, we had to test the devices. We worked with the industry. We worked with fishermen. We went on boats. They tested the gear, looking at what they caught in a net with no bird in it, compared to the net on the other side of the boat that had a bird in it. And those tests were done over many years and several years, and it showed that several devices actually reduced the finfish bycatch by the 50% requirement of weakfish as the requirement of the plan. But it also showed that it was mostly larger fish that got out, that the smaller fish, the ones around the size of the shrimp, tended to stay in the net. But we achieved the reductions required at the toe level, and we continue even today trying to research better birds. One of the concerns that came up when we were testing these things is some of the devices had a huge shrimp loss. The fishermen lost a lot of shrimp, and obviously they didn't like that device at all. And so we tried to work on those devices that would maximize fish reduction and minimize shrimp loss. The basic feeling at the time was that we at the ASMSC expected that reducing this bycatch of weak fish and we would also see reductions in other major components of the shrimp trawl bycatch, which some of the top tier species are southern flounder, spot, and croaker, that we would see positive results on all those species. But if you look at the stock status of these four over the last 20 years, those stocks, since the bycatch reduction devices were implemented, have declined by 80 to 99%. And also remember that there's hundreds of species of fish that are impacted by shrimp trawls. And some of those, such as kingfishes, also vernacularly around here known as sea mullet, summer flounder, pigfish, and others, many are showing concerning trends. So there's a problem when, in my opinion, there's a problem when the primary harvest from a particular gear type is not the target species. In fact, the shrimp trawl fishery catches far more juvenile fishes than they do shrimp. So why didn't it work? Some would argue it has worked. I don't know how, but some will argue that it has worked. But we're gonna take the position that it did not work, and that those devices have had very little impact on the reduction of population level mortality. So you would think, again, after 20 years of requiring a 50% reduction in the largest source of mortality on these fish, that we would see some quantifiable improvements to the stock. We haven't. Birds reduce, the bycatch reduction devices actually reduce the bycatch from an individual tow. So they're simply trawl efficiency devices, reducing the culling time to get to the shrimp. So you can see, if you remember that picture of the man sitting on the back deck, if you cut the number of fish back there in half, it's going to be much easier to get the shrimp and get on to the next tow. But the fact that another trawl, the fact that the magnitude of effort is so intense in North Carolina, the fact that another trawl is going to come along soon, most likely, and interact with those same fish again, and likely again, and even further again, over the course of a 6 to 8 month season, reduces the chance of survival throughout the months-long shrimping season in the estuarine nursery grounds. And we indicate and we believe that all of Pamlico Sound, Core Sound, Albemarle Sound, Bogue Sound, the inshore waters of North Carolina, serve as a functional nursery area to many, many species just about year-round. So the fact that they work these estuarine nursery grounds hard, and they work the nearshore ocean habitats around the inlets during the year as well, but most particularly in the fall, when the shrimp are moving out of the sounds. So we want to be there at the inlets to catch the shrimp. Well, the juvenile fishes are leaving at the same time, heading off to either spawn for the first time or head out to overwintering nursery grounds, where they might come back the next year as actually a marketable fish, but they don't make it. The magnitude of effort is extraordinary and unique in North Carolina, with the chances, I believe, of a juvenile fish actually avoiding the natural mortality that it is very high in the estuaries during its early life history. And then when it's about 4 to 6 months old, is subjected to another 4 to 6, maybe even longer months of shrimp trawl bycatch. The likelihood of an individual fish surviving that to actually reach the spawning grounds is, I believe, very, very remote. Another reason why I don't think it worked is I believe shrimp trawl activity promotes mortality. Predators such as birds, dolphins, whales, a lot of different shark species. Principally among them are the black-tipped sharks, the spinner sharks, the black-nose, sandbars, various other species, and then fish species, bonita, false albacore, Spanish mackerel, king mackerel, cobia, any number, actively are cruising along following these trawls while the fishing activity occurs in many instances. And so those fish that are actively swimming out of the birds, all right, the fish cue in on that. And the fish are eaten, and those juvenile fishes that are leaving the birds are probably being eaten by these predators as they follow the net. The assumption is that they all survive that release. So then once the net comes to the surface after it's hauled back, the net continues to cull and wash fish. And in fact, some fishermen indicate that that's where the majority of the culling actually occurs, especially through the mesh sizes, is while the net's washing up on the surface. At this time, the birds have joined the party. You've got sharks, fishes, et cetera. Again, the assumption is since these fish don't come on the deck, they survive. And anybody that's been around a shrimp trawler when it's being hauled back knows that there's a tremendous amount of activity around the back of that trawler of fishes that we presume are swimming away and surviving are actually being consumed. So the actual number of fish that survive the culling process through the birds while the fishery is actually active is unknown. But it must be, the number that survive must be very, very small in most cases. The other issue is that the juvenile fishes that are brought on deck do not survive. The culling process begins sometimes 15, 20 minutes at the earliest usually. My experience of observation shows that sometimes it's an hour or more before those fish are placed on deck and the culling process even begins. It takes a while to go through all that biomass, and the fish are pushed overboard once they've gone through that bolus of fish, and they're starting to get pushed overboard while these predators are still sitting there waiting. They know, and as soon as those fish hit the water, it erupts with predators that are feeding on and birds that are feeding on what's being thrown overboard. From my experience, the ones with a little life left that might be wiggling just a little bit tend to be the ones that are first targets. So from our perspective, why didn't it work? Bycatch reduction devices or trawl efficiency devices. There's no evidence that any percentage of juvenile fish survive interactions with shrimp trawls over the season. This is the primary management approach, though, that we've dealt with for this issue for years. The assumption that there's somehow 50% survival is erroneous and would still only apply at the individual tow level. So the $64,000 question that remains unanswered is that when a year class of fish enter into Pamlico Sound from the further upriver estuary nursery grounds, if 1 million fish enter into Pamlico Sound right before the shrimp season opens, how many of those million fish actually reach the spawning grounds? That number must be infinitesimally small if they interacted with a shrimp trawl. So the Federation for years has worked to urge our state to reduce the amount of shrimp trawl effort. We have not tried to prohibit shrimp trawling, but we believe that reductions in effort and further protecting more habitat so that it can develop into prime estuarine nursery habitat in the estuaries, and protecting them from trawl activity is critical. We presented our petition for rulemaking to the commission. It was approved once, it was disapproved again. We were assured that by going through the amendment process would be more timely, but the facts remain that the petition was approved by the commission first time in 2016, and it's 2021, and we're still waiting for any recommendations on behalf of the state. Based on reports that we've received from the Shrimp Advisory Committee, which you'll hear from Fred Harris here in just a minute about those meetings, there seems to be little hope from the participants that we've talked to that any substantive action is going to be taken. So I think we have a stalemate. I don't quite understand it. The loss of hundreds of millions of food fishes. I mean, our estimate based on the division's shrimp trawl bycatch study was that there was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 billion with a B fish a year lost in the shrimp trawl fishery. But the state appears to discount those concerns in favor of, they say, well, it's unknown, so we're not really sure, so we better not do anything. And when you know that shrimp trawl bycatch is the single greatest source of mortality on stocks that are collapsing or at least severely depleted, the best scientific approach here would be the precautionary approach to take action and try to figure out why you're not seeing any benefits from this what we've done over the last 20 years. But because the numbers are unknown, there's justification, it appears, to do little or nothing. The other South Atlantic states have restricted their fleet to offshore. Bycatch there is less of an issue, I believe, and the birds probably have some benefit and probably work more better. But these states, we brought this issue up to the Atlantic states. These states view this as a North Carolina issue that we need to resolve. And at present, it's not been resolved. So the problem is the leadership of the state, at least from my experience thus far, appears to show no interest. So what can you do? Just like the last webinar where we talked about writing your legislators, writing your House members, writing your Senate members, write to the governor, expressing your concerns over the management of our coastal marine fisheries resources, in total, and certainly submit comments on the upcoming Shrimp Amendment 2 to the DEQ secretary, the director, whoever that is coming. There's a new director supposedly being interviewed at this particular moment, and the chair of the Marine Fisheries Commission, demanding that we have meaningful reductions in shrimp trawl effort and expand permanent nursery areas and providing inlet closures and corridors to escape routes so that these fish can get offshore and spawn for the first time. So that is what I have. Now I have to go back to the meeting, stop meeting, and turn my video back on. I think I'm good. Tara, I'm looking for Tara to smile at me.
Yep, it's perfect.
And cool. So now I will turn it over to Blakely to provide a little more information on the petition, maybe even have a little discussion about the fiscal note and what our expectations are. Blakely, glad to see you.
Hey, Lewis, thanks very much. And thanks, everyone. As Lewis said, my name is Blakely Hilbrand. I'm an attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I'm glad to be with you today. And what I would plan to do is just walk through some of the steps that that we've taken in partnership with North Carolina Wildlife Federation on behalf of North Carolina Wildlife Federation to try to advance some of the issues that Lewis just laid out. And I think he provided a great outline of why this is such an important issue and what we've done to try to address the issue. And I started working on this 7 years ago when I started at SCLC, and I regret to say that, as Lewis pointed out, not much has changed since that time. We started working together on this issue back in 2014 when Amendment 1 to the Shrimp FMP was under development, and worked closely with Wildlife Federation to submit comments outlining some very common sense management strategies that the Marine Fisheries Commission could incorporate into Amendment 1 to the Shrimp FMP. They didn't adopt many of those or any of those management strategies or recommendations. And so we decided, Wildlife Federation decided that they wanted to submit a petition for rulemaking. And what this really means is that the Federation wanted to see changes to the rules that govern fisheries management for the Division of Marine Fisheries. And so we put together, in partnership with, Lewis was an integral part of this team, along with Jack Travelstead and Dr. Luis Barbieri, we put together a very comprehensive, data-driven, science-driven proposal that tried to get at some of the issues that Lewis was just talking about: protecting habitat areas, ensuring that more fish survive to juveniles and grow and thrive and contribute to the adult population, protecting resources, fisheries resources for everyone in the state, and balancing the needs of the commercial industry with the need to protect important habitat areas, which benefit all fishermen. And so we developed a proposal and submitted that proposal to the Marine Fisheries Commission. And I'll walk through some of the details of that. But this was a comprehensive proposal that took quite a bit of time and consulting with experts to put together. It was very much a data-driven, research-driven proposal. And we proposed designating special secondary nursery areas in the Pamlico Sound, Bogue Sound, Core Sound, and other nearshore waters that where the data had shown were nursery areas for several fish species. The petition would also establish clear guidelines for opening shrimp season, would have required, and then put in place specific gear restrictions and measures. So restricting head rope length, requiring the use of a second bycatch reduction device, limiting tow times, limiting the number of days per week when trawling could take place to 3 days per week, and limiting trawling to daylight hours only. And the final component of the proposal included size limits for spot and croaker. So we presented this petition to the Commission in November of 2016, and then in February of 2017, the petition was granted by the Marine Fisheries Commission. This is a really exciting development. Wildlife Federation worked extremely hard to turn people out to demonstrate to the Commission that this was a really important process and proposal. And the Marine Fisheries Commission ultimately adopted the petition. And at that time was supposed to initiate the process of incorporating these management strategies into the rules that govern the division and the industry. But we hit a couple of roadblocks, which Lewis alluded to a few moments ago. The State Budget Office, as required by state law, the State Budget Office did play a role in evaluating the economic impact of these rules. And we received a draft fiscal analysis in mid-2018, over a year after the proposal had been adopted by the Marine Fisheries Commission, that was legally and substantively deficient, that really relied on some unsupported assumptions about the fishery, as well as the economic impacts of the proposed rule. Ultimately, the State Budget Office, with the support of the Division of Marine Fisheries, they said that these rules were too expensive to implement. We vigorously objected to that conclusion and tried to demonstrate why that conclusion was wrong, but nonetheless, the Commission adopted that conclusion of the State Budget Office and took no further action on that February 2017 petition for rulemaking. So we went back to the drawing board and put our heads together and thought, what else can we do to advance change in this space? What else can we do to make change in this fishery, to bring the fishery to a better place, to improve management strategies? And we decided to, together to scale back, to introduce another petition for rulemaking to the Commission that would scale back some of the provisions in the original petition, but also ground the petition in protection of habitat areas and supporting the health and viability of certain juvenile populations. So in May of 2019, we submitted on behalf of the Wildlife Federation an updated petition for rulemaking that would do 4 key things. 1, designate internal coastal waters that weren't otherwise designated as nursery areas as what we termed shrimp trawl management areas. In shrimp trawl management areas, we proposed prohibiting trawling on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and restricting the head rope length for all shrimp trawls in those areas. And finally, the proposal would have established criteria for the opening of shrimp season in these shrimp trawl management areas. And unfortunately, after having approved a much broader proposal 2 years prior, 2.5 years prior, the Marine Fisheries Commission declined to adopt the petition. They denied what we thought was a very narrow, research-based, data-driven petition, and instead, on the grounds that the fishery management plan process was the proper process to put these management strategies in place. So that kind of brings us to where we are today, and I think there are others that are going to talk about Amendment 2 to the Shrimp FMP. But I think this process has been difficult. We've hit a lot of roadblocks politically, and I think we are still hoping and hopeful that there are paths forward to advance some of these, I think, really thoughtful strategies for the fishery. So I will turn the floor back over to, I think, Lewis and others. So thanks.
Thank you, Blakely. Appreciate that. And I just wanted to just make one comment on some of the things you said. That the head rope length, for those that aren't aware, we have a limit now on 4 55-foot nets that can be used in the estuary nursery areas of Pamlico Sound, Core Sound, those areas. The idea is that by reducing that, it would be more of a protection for our local smaller shrimpers, which are the vast majority of shrimpers, and try to avoid these larger industrial size trawlers, the 100-foot steel hull trawlers that are pulling maximum amount of gear through the sounds, particularly those that come in from out of state where they're not allowed to use shrimp trawls in their estuary and nursery areas. So I just want to make sure that was clear and everybody understood what the head rope issue was. That's a big issue for us. So to kind of wrap this part of the process up here, I've asked Fred to sort of describe his efforts with the advisory panel. There was a new process set up where they met very intensively for about 4 days. And Fred was a representative on that advisory committee, and he can give us an update on where that process is. Fred.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. Serving on the advisory committee was certainly an interesting process. The shrimp management plan was developed early in this century. It's been amended once, and it's time to be amended again. 5 years have gone by since the last amendment. And so the Marine Fisheries Commission, as part of amending the shrimp management plan, forms an advisory committee of anglers, scientists, interested people to advise the Division of Marine Fisheries on various issues associated with shrimp management. And so prior to our meetings this year, the Division of Marine Fisheries did a commendable job, I feel, in identifying the issues that the committee needed to consider. They were all appropriate issues and critical to shrimp management. And then the committee convened. We were not able to convene in person, so it was done over calls like this, which I'm past the age where I can adapt to this sort of thing. I adapt better to in-person meetings, but it went as well as I think it could have, better than I expected. And we discussed those issues. And as you might guess, the committee had a lot of diverse and often conflicting perspectives on that issue, which on reflection, I think was a good thing. We're not a decider committee, we're an advisory committee. And if we're to give the staff of Marine Fisheries our advice, you need different perspectives on the issue. And certainly we had those, but we discussed those issues in a civil manner. It wasn't acrimonious at all. And so from that perspective, I think it was valuable. Now the test will come in what does the staff of the Marine Fisheries Division and the Marine Fisheries Commission do with that set of diverse perspectives and opinions they're going to get on this. And I think the acute issues in this are going to be habitat protection, particularly shrimp trawling over soft bottoms. And the issue here became, particularly in Pamlico Sound, that trawling over soft bottoms really doesn't hurt anything, that you have storms and hurricanes that often stir up the bottom and muddy the water. But those are episodic events. As Lewis mentioned in his talk, the trawling is repeated, that throughout the shrimp season, it is one tow after another tow after another tow disturbing the bottom. And so you have chronic turbidity for a long period of time. And I think it's entirely possible that chronic turbidity prevents new beds of aquatic vegetation from establishing themselves. And so that we could expand valuable habitat by having submerged aquatic vegetation there by reducing the turbidity that comes from shrimp trawling. Well, that was one issue. Lewis very effectively covered the bycatch issue, which is there, as he correctly pointed out. It's a very difficult thing to quantify. You can get estimates of bycatch. Getting precise estimates of bycatch is very difficult because the bycatch is very variable. There are many things that affect that. It can be done. It's just a little expensive to do. But I think we can make reasonable presumptions based on Lewis's reasoning in his presentation that the bycatch is significant. Bycatch mortality is more significant than we often give it credit for being because of predation on those animals escaping through a bird or being pushed back overboard from a sorting table while they are still alive. Mortality on those has to be very high. There were different perspectives on that. So the bottom line from the advisory committee, and in my perspective, is we did our job. We gave the Division of Marine Fisheries various perspectives on the issue and various opinions on the issue that they have to take and formulate into management practices. And we sincerely hope that they take seriously that the first objective they have is to protect the aquatic resources and conserve those resources and make sure that the fisheries on those resources are sustainable into the future. And I don't think we can do that with cosmetic changes around the edges. They're going to have to be, as Blakely pointed out, we need more substantive changes that are going to conserve the resources. And we can't let economic disadvantage to certain groups control that. It's something that has to be considered and has to be dealt with because there will be people that are economically disadvantaged. But the overriding factor needs to be the conservation of the resource. And that will come out in the management plan that DMF develops and subsequently recommends to the Marine Fisheries Commission. But to sum up, I think the advisory committee did their job on this. They identified the various perspectives and the various sides representing those perspectives, I thought very effectively made their case on that. So back to you, Lewis.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for spending that time and that effort on behalf of the Federation and behalf of the state to provide those opinions and feedback. So yeah, I think where we are at this particular moment is we await a draft amendment 2 from the division that will go to I presume will go to the Marine Fisheries Commission for approval for public hearings, and then that process will begin. And the opportunity for public comment, maybe we'll be out of the COVID scare and we'll be able to have in-person meetings and public meetings on the issue, and hope that we get some of the substantive measures that we believe were included in our petition at least considered as alternatives for public discussion. So that is pretty much the program for today. And so I would ask Tara to kind of look for folks and see if there are any questions that anybody may have directed to any one of the three of us.
Yeah, great. And I just want to let you all know, if you would like to ask a question, there are 2 ways to ask questions. You can put a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will call on you. So two different ways to ask your question, depending upon what you prefer. Thank you so much to our great speakers today. This was really, really helpful. And if anyone has a question that would like to start off, feel free to raise your hand or put that in the chat. Looks like you guys covered it so well that we don't have any questions yet. So
I have a question, Tara. This is Tim.
Go for it, Tim.
It seems like this process, as outlined, has taken a long time with no immediate impacts, and so we remain with hundreds of millions of juvenile fish not reaching maturity and opportunity to spawn. What would be a solution in any of the panelists' minds to expedite this process, or any process in marine fisheries reform? I believe Lewis is froze up. There he is. Okay.
No, I'm good. I hesitate because there have been so many changes that have been made to the process since I was with the division. Many of those changes, I don't understand how they were made. So I'm sure there are reasons, and I haven't been made privy to the way that the process is working now. It seems like the division has far more influence now over the recommendations than that we had when I was director. So I think we've got to be able to convince the staff, work with the staff to try to come up with an understanding of why some of these issues seem to be objectionable to many of them. And I would welcome that opportunity. But to speed the process along, I mean, ever since I've been involved with it, you know, it's gotten progressively more paralysis by analysis. You know, the fact that it takes these years to develop a fishery management plan because it has to go through so many processes. The resource suffers because of that delay. And it seems like every time we move forward in an approach, the supplement to Southern Flounder was a great example. I believe we had a plan in place that would have addressed that issue back in 2016. But because of court interference, we weren't able to implement any of the reductions. And we maintained status quo for 3 more years as the stock continued to decline. I don't know that we have that time anymore. I think there needs to be dramatic changes to the way the fisheries are managed. I think there needs to be a dramatic overhaul of the Fisheries Reform Act that speeds up the process. I think there needs to be a process whereby the division can take these actions unilaterally under emergency conditions. Go back to temporary rulemaking authority, which allowed us to move quickly and implement these things rather than having to go through the absolutely awful administrative procedures of rulemaking that take years. And now that everybody's discovered that 10 simple letters of objection to the General Assembly can stop the process altogether and require the General Assembly to deal with it. So nothing ever gets done. I mean, I try to come up with, people ask me, you know, what's happened, you know, what positive has happened. And I mean, I can't find anything to express in terms of positive recently. And I know there's a tremendous amount of angst and turnover. They're looking for another director. There are a lot of issues there. I don't want to be critical of the staff, but we got to move quicker. And it seems like delay is almost the preference just to see what ultimately happens. And we're just not going to get anywhere if we continue to do that. And so, you know, as you know, the Wildlife Board has directed us to move forward very strongly with a 1 commission, 1 mission. I believe the Wildlife Resources Commission can handle these issues in a much more rapid, much more comprehensive, science-based way. And I'm of the belief at this particular point in time that that's the only way we're going to restore these resources that, you know, 99% decline in weak fish, 90% decline in blue crab, southern flounder, spot, croaker. I mean, just continue to name it. And the few species that we have that we can point to that have been successful, the management actions won't be considered for other species, and it's hard to understand. So I think there needs to be a lot more communication. We've been very unsuccessful, and I think Blakely can certainly account for this. We've been very successful in trying to work with the powers that be to express these concerns and to talk about the fiscal note, to talk about the issues that we have. It seems like we're not being, these issues are not being considered. And so, long drawn out answer to a pretty simple question, but it's a very difficult problem. And until we have, as long as we have the folks in the legislature fighting back one another about any fisheries bill, no matter what it does, we're gonna continue to have these problems to the point where I don't know that many of these species can make it.
Great. Thanks for the great question, Tim, and thank you for the great answer. I don't see any other questions right now, but just one thing I wanted to point out, I noticed that people from across the whole state signed up for the talk here, and I wanted to hear from you guys. This may seem like an obvious answer, but why should people from the mountains and the Piedmont care about this topic, care about shrimp trawling? Is it important to everyone across the whole state? Any of you three are able to take that one?
Well, the simple answer, and Lewis can give the detailed answer, I saw him getting ready to do that, is that those resources belong to all the citizens of the state. We all collectively own those resources. The Division of Marine Fisheries manages those resources in our behalf. So it does become a societal issue in that we all own them, and those resources, I don't like health of the ecosystem. It's not a term I like, but I'll use it. The health of that ecosystem in the marine environment is important to all of us for many reasons. And so people living in Murphy or wherever should be just as concerned, have just as much right to be concerned and to be heard about those issues as someone living in Manio does. And now Lewis or Blakely can give the real answer to that question.
I couldn't say it better. I think it leads in very nicely to next week's webinar, the tragedy of the commons, and the management of the public trust. And are these resources indeed a public trust? And do we have a responsibility as a state to manage them for sustainability? I mean, that's what the Fisheries Reform Act says we do. So I agree. I mean, we know that I know that folks on the coast are very interested in elk restoration in the mountains. And there are a lot of people that just like to know that there are elk walking around. They may never see one. Butterfly Highway, a lot of these things that have implications for the ecosystem. And you said it. I mean, I can't imagine what the overall ecosystem impacts are to Pamlico Sound of losing 12 million, 14 million pounds of shrimp and the additional bycatch associated with that away from, the forage species that need to find those. I think the ecosystem impacts must be extraordinary. And so, but it's up to us. I mean, the ASMFC isn't going to deal with it. The federal government, God forbid, isn't going to come in and do something, I hope. But we've got the opportunity, and we've got to do it for the person in Asheboro that looks just likes to know that there are weak fish swimming around in the Sound. And there are a lot of people like that. And we just have to get them interested, involved, in talking to these legislators, especially west of 95, where if they don't hear from their constituents, they rely on the few coastal legislators to make the decision on how we manage our marine resources. And that's why we're in the trouble we're in today.
Thank you all. And we do have a statement comment in the chat that says that States have dropped the legislative mandate of managing for harvest and have gone to a full-fledged statutory objective to manage for yield, whose objective is abundance over harvest. In the panel's opinion, would such a fundamental change in NC's management goal allow the state to deal with issues affecting bycatch and the juvenile mortality at a faster rate? And I know that was a nice long question. I can repeat or we can take a look in the chat, but that's a great question.
I think the question focuses on having quotas and managing for strict total allowable landings. And I think, yes, that is a critical component that it appears that the Amendment 3 to the flounder plan is addressing that, which is great, with payback for overages and the like. I have real serious concerns about the amount of reductions from non-harvest losses that are being considered at this particular moment. But yeah, having some specific amount that can be harvested and stopping harvest once you reach that amount and stopping the bycatch is consistent with the Magnuson Act and the Atlantic Coastal, and particularly the Magnuson Act, that requires all fisheries under federal management to be managed by quotas with payback and accountability measures if they're lost. And what we've seen compared to North Carolina, what we've seen in the federal system is we're seeing the results of that over the last 10 years, and we're seeing stocks rebuild. Now, some aren't, but more are than were under the old system. So, I mean, the answer to the question is yes, I think that would help tremendously.
Thank you, Lewis. And we have a question from Bill G. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can just click the little, it's like a microphone button in the top right-hand corner, Bill. Awesome.
It's Bill Gorm again, Lewis's favorite questionnaire. It's just in reference to the comment about quotas. And this is something that I'm going to do everything I can to take head on. And I know it feels impossible, but you know, I understand the quota system. I get the rationale behind it. But Lewis, what can we do? What can stakeholders do to demand that, even recreationally, that we don't force a ton of bycatch? As far, and I say a ton, like southern flounder, as we've talked about, 9 to 1. And the more we go up, the higher that goes. To turn some of that into harvest, so we're not at 50,000 pounds harvest, 150,000 pounds dead discarded, or 50,000, you know, 1 for 1. And I'm not trying to undermine anything about shrimp trawling. It's just something in the recreational sector that fishery after fishery, it's like, what can we do to utilize this public trust resource? Thank you.
Well, that's a very good question. It's a very difficult question, and we see it by, I think Fred talked about nibbling around the edges, which is what we've done in my career here. We haven't really faced these issues head on, and as a result, you know, we've got 1 fish recreational bag limit on red drum, 4 speckled trout. The division from Draft Amendment 3, Volume 2, is a 1 fish southern flounder bag limit. The weak fish is 1 fish. So we've boxed ourselves into a corner in that we really don't have anywhere to go other than closed seasons in order to achieve the necessary reductions because the stocks are in such bad shape. So that's problem 1. But when options are suggested that can address those issues, for example, you know, almost eliminating the bycatch in southern flounder. I mean, the division indicates that there's 1.9 million releases because everybody's catching 10 to 15 southern flounder in the 13 to 15 inch category, under 15 to catch 1 15-inch fish. And so there's this huge amount of discard mortality in that fishery. All right. Combine that with shrimp trawl bycatch is even more tremendous reduction losses to non-harvest mortalities and discard mortalities. But the proposal, the idea of reducing the size limit down to 12 inches, which is supported by a lot of commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen, to reduce the discards tremendously. I'm very unaware of a whole lot of harvests of southern flounder less than 12 inches. Recognizing that not a lot of people go out and catch and release southern flounder, so people would go out and catch their couple of southern flounder at 12 to 18 inches and then move on to something else. But that option was rejected and is not even being considered in the upcoming Amendment 3. So, I mean, there's got to be options. We got to be able to think outside that box, Billy, and be able to make those recommendations. But if they're unaccepted, and now there seems to be an approach where these options can be considered but rejected and not considered further, I mean, I don't know how you address that issue other than one mission, one commission. That's the only way I know to address it. So, at this particular moment in time. And I know that won't sit well with a lot of the audience, but that's just my belief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lewis. And great question, Bill. So we have just a few minutes left. So if anyone has one more pending question that they'd like to put in the chat or raise your hand, this would be the time to do it. This has been a great hour. So thank you, Blakely and Lewis and Fred for talking to us today. We've learned a lot. So we'll just give everyone another few seconds in case anyone would like to ask one last pending question. If anyone has any questions afterwards, we would be happy to get you in contact with our 3 speakers here. So that is no problem if you come up with a question afterwards. We'd be happy to forward that to them. And I think we do not have any more questions. So thank you all so much for being a part of this great talk today. We will send the recording over in just a few days. And we hope that you join our next webinar, which will be next Thursday at the same time at noon, and it will be a Tragedy of the Commons talk. So I'm really looking forward to that. And thank you so much again to our speakers and for joining us here. And we hope you have a great day.